All right, well, Tara is going to share her story. So I'll just toss it off to her.
All right, thanks, hon. Okay, so I was born and raised in Utah County. Have you guys been down to Provo? You're probably going down there, BYU.
Yeah, we're staying in Mormon.
Oh, yeah, okay, so you guys know that area. So I grew up down there, and my parents, we're fifth generation Mormons on both sides, like super Mormon. Pioneer stock is what they call us. I don't know how much you guys know about Mormonism, I'm not sure, but, so anyways, when I was 15, my dad was killed in an accident, and that kind of like shook my whole, like, the eternal family thing. All the Mormons are like, oh, aren't you so thankful for your eternal family? And I'm like, that's easy for you to say, your dad's still alive. Like, so, anyway, I had a lot of anger at God. So I kind of became like agnostic a little bit, just rebellious teenager, became a very rebellious teenager. She'll be 25, wow, I'm getting old. I have a 25-year-old daughter. I got pregnant when I was 17 with her, and she lives up in Ogden. She's a vet tech up there. But, yeah, so I was really rebellious. I married her dad. We were only married for a short time. That was a bad relationship. He was physically abusive and ended up getting divorced and ended up in Texas. Long story, but ended up in Texas and was invited by, my first job that I had, there was this Christian girl, and she found out that I came from like a Mormon background, so she was asking me all these questions. I thought, oh, maybe she wants to join. Like, I could totally like get her to join, even though I wasn't active and didn't believe it. But, well, I kept thinking I would get my life together someday when I was an adult, and then I'd go back to the Mormon church and go through the temple and have the happy life, because you could only have a happy life if you're a Mormon, right? That's what I believe. So, but I was having too much fun partying and acting like a young 20-something-year-old. How long was I in Dallas? It wasn't that long, but she invited me to her church, and so I went to her church, and I heard the first sermon I ever heard was the sermon about throw away the list and just trust Christ, have a relationship with Christ. And I was like, what? They can't teach that? That's like gotta be blasphemy. But I was like, this is cool. I like this. I also loved the music because I had only ever done like hymns, and I loved that people just showed up in jeans and t-shirts, and like it was super casual, and I was like, oh, this is kind of nice, a little different. But I kind of floated in and out of church for about 3 years, and then my cousin, actually, I was really close to him. He lived in Texas. He was the only I had an aunt and uncle and him that lived in Texas, and he was close to my age, and he had committed suicide, and that just kind of like threw me for a loop. So I was very depressed and didn't know what was wrong with me, but I was depressed. This friend of mine said, I'd met this guy, and he was Christian, and he had said, well, I thought we worked together anyway. He asked me on a date once or something. We went out anyway, and then he found out I was Mormon, and he was like, oh, well, you're Mormon, and I'm a Christian. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm a Christian. He's like, no, because you believe Jesus and Satan are brothers. And I'm like, well, yeah, everyone believes that. He's like, no, that's not what we believe. So that was like the first time I had heard that like Mormons weren't Christian. I was like, what? Of course we're Christian. We're just a different denomination. Even though like I grew up in Utah and I'd never been exposed to any other faith, like only Mormonism. But anyway, so then he had told me about Celebrate Recovery, because I told him I was going through a rough time. I'd lost my brother, he was like a brother to me. I'd lost my cousin, and so he pointed me to Celebrate Recovery. So I started going, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And like people were really authentic. They were getting up going, hey, I'm struggling with this, drug addiction, pornography. I'm like, whoa, what? You're saying this in church? Like, I want to say this in church. But I was like, wow, these people are just real. They're like real, they're authentic. And this is like a safe place to struggle. So that like really drew me in. So I don't know how many of you guys know about Celebrate Recovery, but by the third step, you have to have a relationship with Christ. And I thought I did, because like I grew up, I knew all the stories about Jesus as a baby, and he died on the cross for our sins, but I did not have what all these other Christians were talking about, this relationship piece. So I had met this friend, Becca, who actually introduced us, so she's a matchmaker too. But I said, hey, I'm like kind of curious about becoming a Christian. I thought I'd have to go talk to the pastor and tell him I was worthy, even though I understood that's not how it worked, but I don't know, I had it in my mind. So she's like, come over tonight, I'll cook dinner. I'm like, okay. So I went over, and she like basically laid out the gospel for me and asked if I wanted to pray to receive Christ. I'm like, sure, yeah, I'll do that. I had no idea what that meant or anything. And then I'm like, you just pray for me and I'll just agree. So she's like, Lord, please forgive Tara of her many sins. I'm like, that bad, Wow, this whole sin thing, I don't like this. But, Anyway, the next day she sent me this long email welcoming me to this family of Christ. I'm like, oh, did I join a cult? Like, I don't really know. But I was just kind of intrigued. So I just kept going. Like, I was just like, I kept going to church. And I mean, I do believe that I was like saved at that point. But like my faith was, I was just a little baby Christian. Still pooping in my diapers, didn't understand it. You know, I'm like, I don't know. I don't really know. I was still going out drinking. I was kind of figuring out like, what does this mean? How does this like get changed? And well, I definitely know the Lord started like really convicting me of all that. Like, and so it's like, I need to get my life straight. So then I just kept pouring into CR. So a few years after that, I think it was like 2 or 3 years, the same girl that I prayed with to receive Christ, she had sent me Rob's website information. So I was just going to look at it to like talk to my family, because I was like going to come home for Christmas and I was like going to get everybody saved, because like, why wouldn't you? Like, it's so awesome. Sat them all down and like, you guys are going to die and go to hell, but I've got the solution right here. Let's all pray. Come on. And they're like, cuckoo, crazy, crazy. So they like, yeah, they didn't receive Christ. I was kind of bummed. But so Rob and I started talking. And yeah, and then he was coming to Dallas. I was living in Dallas at the time, so he's coming to Dallas for his brother's, was graduating from Dallas Theological Seminary. So I was like, oh yeah, let's meet. And then I met him and I was like, he's cute. So we thought each other was cute. And then, yeah, we like spent a lot of time together that week or weekend. And then we talked on the phone all the time. Yeah, and then... which is funny because I didn't even really know if he was single. We never really talked about like dating or anything. It was just like theology stuff. So I met his whole family, by the way, the first time I met him in person. The whole family. Well, except for your brother from Serbia and his family. But yeah, met his dad. His dad's first thing was, so tell me how you came to know the Lord. I'm like, whoa, okay, well, we're just jumping right in there. Then met Rob, and then he moved to Dallas to date me. And look, now we're married with 2 little girls that are so excited because they are over at their friend's house right now. Yeah, and well, the funny thing was, he said, I want to move back to Utah, because he was living in California working on his PhD at the time, and he said, I want to move back to Utah and be a missionary to the Mormons. And I was like, I don't do that. Let's not do that. That sounds terrible. I'm like, no. And then we're dating, and he's like, well, we'll just see what happens. I kept saying, no, I really don't want to go back to Utah. Even when I did come back, I cried for like 2 years. I was like, I don't like it here. I'm going to go back to my safe Bible belts where everybody's Christian and like people at the gym are talking about the Bible. And then you come here and it's all about Joseph Smith. But anyways, and so we've been here for 11 years, a long time. So yeah, any questions? Okay, what are you going to talk about today? Do you know?
Yeah. My ministry and how to approach Mormons.
Yeah. Yeah, so he probably actually knows more about Mormonism than I do, even though I grew up in it, because he's like studied all the real stuff they believe. Like, I didn't even know half the crazy stuff they believed. Well, I knew a lot, but not all of it until I met Rob, and I'm like, what? Adam God? Never heard that before. Like, all this crazy. I mean, I knew about Mother God, that we weren't supposed to say her name, and all that stuff, but I didn't know about... I knew that... Well, did I know about Kolob? I don't think I knew about Kolob and all that weird stuff.
I had to Kolob. You never said that.
Yeah, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't understand it, so...
So, Tara, do you think that's true of, so we're at BYU, do you think that's true of most Mormon young people, that they won't have really thought through much of what they believe while they believe it?
Yeah, well, if they're born and raised in it, and especially Utah Mormons, I will tell you there's a huge difference between Utah Mormons and non-Utah Mormons, so keep that in mind. Because I didn't even know, but when I moved to Texas, like the Texas Mormons were like, oh, you're from Utah. And I'm like, yes, the promised land, you're welcome. I thought I was like so wonderful because I'm from Utah. No, they didn't like me because I was from Utah, because they're like, you have no idea what you believe because you live in like the Mecca of Mormonism. You don't know. You haven't been like, people don't come up to you and like ask you questions and stuff. So no, so if you're running into like somebody that's born and raised in Utah, very different, because they probably have not been challenged in their faith. They probably have not really thought about what they believe. It's like cultural, yeah.
So for someone like that, what would you recommend might be a good approach? What would be something that might plant a seed in their mind?
Oh, there's so many different things. I think I do think it's really important to challenge. I know a lot of people are like, I don't want to challenge, I just want to be friends. But and especially, I hate this, kind of sounds mean, but you're only here for a short time. So like, plant those pebbles. You're not here to really make friends, okay? Like that friend ministry, do that at home with the Mormons there. While you're here, like, don't be rude or anything, but give them the challenging stuff. Say, hey, like, what do you think about this? You know, Joseph Smith had 34 wives. He had like some 14-year-olds. Tell me about that. And like, I'm kind of surprised at how many people don't even know about that, or the justification they try to give for that. So I say, like, hit them with some of that hard stuff, like, that they probably don't know about. And especially now, because they're trying to be so Christian. Like, they don't want to be called Mormon anymore. When I grew up in the Mormon church, Mormon was like a proud thing to say. Now it's like, don't call them Mormons. They want to be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I think you can still call them LDS, right? Latter-day Saints? I don't know. But so, I don't know. Just give them some things to think about. Because there is definitely things like that. So with the friend that told me that Mormons weren't Christian, I do remember as a little kid going down to Temple Square, and there was some guy passing out pamphlets or something. It said, do you believe in celestial vegetables? And I was like so mad I was going to go rip up a pamphlet. And my grandpa was like, just leave them alone. Like, they don't know the truth. And so, but that bothered me. Like, I still remember the name of the pamphlet, and I was like 8 years old. And it was like, do you believe in celestial vegetables? And I'm like, what? Celestial vegetables? So that stuck with me all these years. And Rob, you knew the guy that was passing that out or something, you thought, or I don't know. But it's this crazy Mormons believed in like celestial vegetables. I don't know.
Oh, Brigham Young.
Yeah, used to teach that. So, but yeah, so I think just give them some of the more challenging stuff. Ask them about it. Ask them, you know, how do they defend the racism? I did know about the racism and the polygamy, and it always bothered me. Always bothered me. But, you know, my parents said, oh, the polygamy was because all these women came across the plains and lost their husbands, which is not true. So that was why it was okay. And then the racism was that the world, it wasn't God, it was the world was so racist that they couldn't let blacks hold the priesthood. So there was like all those lame excuses. But now, so back when I came out, well, I came out in like early 2000s, so there was the internet. But when I was a kid back in the 90s, there was no internet. So like you couldn't go look stuff up. I mean, when I started getting to high school, the internet was fairly new, but you couldn't go look stuff up. Nowadays they can. They can go right to the church's website and see how many wives Joseph Smith had. So like challenging them with things they can look up on their own is pretty good, I think. And then they have to defend that. So I also think another good thing is like talk about the difference between like how the Bible can be backed up with like the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and like how you don't have that with the Book of Mormon, and that really stuck with me too. So some of those things, and it just depends on the person, you know, just let the Holy Spirit kind of lead that. But I definitely think if you're here for just a short time, don't be afraid to challenge them. You know, definitely, I think there's a time and place for, I'm not against friendship ministry, I do it all the time, but when you're here, like, plant those seeds, be the little rocks in the shoe that they just eventually. The sad thing is, and I hear this all the time, a lot of them leave, and there's a huge atheist population here. Huge. Like they have an atheist conference in Salt Lake every year. Because they leave and then they throw everything out. And then they become atheists. In fact, I didn't tell you this, but my sister called me the other day. She had once made a profession of faith, but I don't know where she is. But she was telling me, she shared with a coworker all about the crazy stuff in Mormonism. And she said, oh, I'm so happy she called me. And she finally left the Mormon church like 3 years ago. And she said I was a big part of that. And so now she's so excited to have her Sundays back and to give her money to like Habitat for Humanity and all this. I'm like, oh, so she didn't come to Christ. Like, it's just kind of a bummer. But my sister's all excited, and I'm like, that's not exciting for me. Like, that's just as sad as Mormonism, right? You're just going into nothingism. So that, I think that happens a lot. So just also pointing them to Christ, you know, like, and giving them the evidence for why you believe, and not just, you know, because like they have the good feeling, and that's not what our Christian faith is. Not just all about good feelings. Not that we don't have that as a piece of it, but actually holding on to like the truth. So, yeah. And they're always like, oh, there's so much exclusivity in the gospel. I'm like, there's exclusivity in every religion. Please do not play that card on me. But